Most people think of the middle of nowhere as a place to find peace, a place to escape the noise, the crowds, the stress of the world. And they're not wrong, for the most part. But there's a different kind of nowhere. It's the kind you don't find on a map, the kind you stumble into when your car breaks down or you take a wrong turn. In these places, the silence isn't peaceful. It's watchful. And you quickly learn that you didn't escape the world, you just left its rules behind. My girlfriend and I found one of those places on a stretch of highway between Utah and Nevada. We were driving cross-country, moving my life from Ohio to California. We were young, broke, and running on a dangerously optimistic schedule. It was day 3, and we were pushing through the Great Basin. The landscape is hypnotic out there. Just vast, empty stretches of sagebrush and salt flats under a sky that feels infinitely huge. It's beautiful until you realize how utterly, terrifyingly alone you are. That's when my old Honda decided to give up the ghost. There was a loud bang from under the hood, a plume of steam, and then we were just coasting to a dead stop on the shoulder of a 2-lane highway. No other cars in sight. No cell service, just the oppressive heat and the ticking of a dying engine. We were stranded. We'd been walking for what felt like an hour, the sun beating down on us, when we saw it. A turnoff we hadn't noticed from the car, and a small, weathered sign that read, "Harmony, 2 miles." Harmony wasn't on our map, and it certainly wasn't on the GPS, but at that point, any sign of civilization was a miracle. The town, when we finally limped into it, was like stepping into a time capsule. It was a single main street, lined with perfectly preserved 1950s storefronts. A diner, a hardware store, a gas station. Everything was immaculate. Not a speck of dust, not a weed in the sidewalk cracks. And the people? They all smiled. Wide, sincere, welcoming smiles. A man in greasy overalls who introduced himself as Jed, the mechanic, promised he could tow our car and have it fixed by morning. A woman at the diner, Sally, served us the best apple pie I've ever tasted and told us the town's only motel was cheap and clean. Everyone was just nice, almost too nice. It was at the motel that the first real crack appeared in Harmony's perfect facade. The man at the front desk looked shockingly similar to Jed the mechanic. Same build, same hairline, just a different set of clothes. "Just one of those things," he chuckled when I mentioned it. "Lots of us look alike out here. Big families." That night, we lay in the disturbingly clean motel room, the kind of silence only the deep desert can offer pressing in on us. Around midnight, I looked out the window, and I saw them. A dozen or so of the townsfolk were standing in the middle of the empty main street, gathered in a loose circle, all staring up at the moon. They weren't moving. They weren't talking. They were just standing. And from our second-story window, I could see them all. A few of them looked identical. Not just similar, identical. There were 3 Jeds, 2 Sallys, standing in that silent, moonlit council. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a town. It was something else. "We're leaving," I whispered to my girlfriend Anna. "Now." We crept out of the motel. Main Street was empty again. We hurried to the mechanic's garage, praying the car was fixed. It was there, parked out front. I looked inside. The engine was completely disassembled, pieces laid out neatly on a greasy tarp. Jed hadn't been fixing it. He'd been taking it apart. Panic set in. We just started running, heading back the way we'd come, down that long, dark road. We hadn't gotten 100 yards when the town's single siren began to wail, a low, mournful sound that echoed across the desert. Then the lights started coming on in the houses, porch lights, one by one, a creeping wave of illumination coming for us. We ran. We heard them behind us, not shouting, but the steady, rhythmic crunch of dozens of footsteps on the gravel road, moving at a calm, unhurried pace. They knew we couldn't outrun them. We ran until our lungs burned, the siren a constant scream at our backs, and then we saw it. A pair of headlights coming towards us on the main highway. A semi-truck. We burst out of the turnoff and stood in the middle of the road, waving our arms frantically. The truck laid on its air horn, but screeched to a stop just feet from us. The driver, a big grizzled man, leaned out his window. "You kids trying to get killed?" We just pointed back at the turnoff, gasping for breath. The siren had stopped. The footsteps were gone. There was nothing there, just an empty patch of desert. "There's no town down that road," the trucker said, his expression a mixture of confusion and pity. "Ain't been anything out here for 50 years. He gave us a ride to the next real town. A real mechanic towed our car. The engine block was cracked, irreparable. But the mechanic told us something else. He said the damage wasn't from overheating. He said it looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it from the inside. We bought a bus ticket and never looked back. But sometimes I see a face in a crowd that's a little too familiar, a smile that's a little too wide, and I feel that desert cold all over again. And I wonder how many other broken down cars have been welcomed into harmony, and how many of their drivers are still there, smiling. My great-uncle was the family ghost, a man no one ever talked about, who had bought a huge plot of land in rural West Virginia decades ago and just vanished from our lives. When he died, I was the only one in his will. I inherited everything, his rundown farmhouse and 200 acres of untouched Appalachian wilderness. For a city kid drowning in debt, it felt like winning the lottery. I packed my bags and went to claim my little kingdom in the middle of nowhere. The house was a wreck, but the land was beautiful. Rolling hills, dense forests, a clear running stream. It was perfect. The lawyer who handled the will gave me a box of my uncle's things and a single, strange piece of advice. "Your great-uncle had one rule for the farm," he said, not meeting my eyes. He was very clear about it in his letters. "You can farm, you can hunt, you can build, but you must never, ever disturb the circle of stones in the north field." The north field was a large overgrown meadow about a mile from the house, and in its center, sure enough, was a circle of 8-foot-tall, moss-covered standing stones. They looked ancient, predating the farm, predating everything. They had a strange, powerful energy about them. I wasn't about to mess with them. I started fixing up the house, enjoying the solitude, but the land was strange. The garden I planted grew with an unnatural speed and vibrancy. The well water was the sweetest, purest water I'd ever tasted. It felt like the land was alive, and it wanted me to thrive. But then the gifts started appearing. Small handmade effigies, woven from corn husks and twine left on my porch in the morning. A perfectly dressed rabbit laid on my doorstep. I drove into the nearest town, a tiny insular place, and asked the old man at the general store about it. He just shook his head. "That land you're on," he said, his voice low, "it takes care of its own, but it asks for a lot in return. Your uncle understood the bargain. You best learn it too." I didn't understand what he meant. The bargain? I brushed it off as local superstition. The real trouble started when a slick developer from the city showed up. He'd somehow heard about my property and made me an offer I couldn't refuse for the north field. He wanted to build luxury cabins. The money was life-changing. I ignored the lawyer's warning, my great-uncle's rule, the old man's cryptic words. I ignored the sick, guilty feeling in my gut. I said yes. A week later, a survey team arrived. I told them about the stones, asking them to work around them. They just laughed. "Gotta do a soil analysis, buddy. That big one in the middle's gotta move." I watched from my porch as their backhoe scraped and groaned, finally dislodging one of the ancient stones from the earth. It toppled with a great groaning thud, and a feeling of profound, sickening wrongness washed over the entire valley. The air grew still. The birds went silent. That night, my dreams were filled with a low, angry, chanting sound, a language that felt like it was made of grinding rock and rustling leaves. I woke up just before midnight to the sound of scratching at my front door. I crept to the window and looked out, and my heart stopped. Standing on my porch, bathed in the pale moonlight, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, and it seemed to be made of woven branches, mud, and corn husks. It had the vague shape of a person, but its face was a blank mask of hardened clay, and its fingers were long, sharp twigs. It was one of the effigies from my porch, but now it was life-sized, and it was moving. I stumbled back from the window as another one appeared at the side of the house, its movements jerky and unnatural. They weren't trying to break down the door. They were surrounding the house, a slow, methodical siege. I ran to the back of the house and looked out at the north field. The stone circle was a scene from a nightmare. The one toppled stone lay on the ground, and from the hole in the earth where it had been, they were climbing out. Dozens of them. Figures made of soil and root and bone, their eyes glowing with a faint green phosphorescence. They were the land's antibodies, and I was the infection. I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my car keys, burst out the back door, and sprinted for my truck. One of the stick and mud things swiped at me as I ran past, its twig-like fingers tearing a long gash in my arm. I threw myself into the truck and roared down the long dirt driveway. They didn't chase me. They just stood there, a silent, earthen army, and watched me go. I never went back. I called the developer, the police, everyone. The developer and his survey team were reported missing a few days later. Their equipment was found in the north field, overgrown with vines that had grown with impossible speed. The police said the case went cold. I know what happened. The land made a bargain with my uncle, his quiet stewardship in exchange for its unnatural bounty. When I broke that bargain, it came to collect, and it took the payment it was owed. The job description was a dream for an introvert like me. Atmospheric data technician. I was hired to spend 3 months living alone in a remote research station in the high plains of Wyoming, monitoring strange radio signals. The company paying me was a private contractor for a university. They said the isolation was the hardest part. They had no idea. The station was a small, high-tech dome plopped down in an endless sea of grass and sky. Just me, a satellite dish, and 100 miles of nothing in every direction. My job was to log the signals, deep space radio bursts, they said, and make sure the equipment kept running. For the first month, it was blissful solitude. The signals were just that, random crackles and pops of cosmic static. But then, they started to change. I noticed a pattern emerging from the noise. It was a simple, repeating sequence. A pulse. Beep, boop, boop, beep. I reported it, as per my instructions. The response from my remote supervisor was terse. Anomalous, but likely a pulsar. Continue logging. But it wasn't a pulsar. The signal started evolving. New patterns emerged. It was complex. It felt intelligent. It felt like a language I couldn't understand. And then the most terrifying thing happened. The signal stopped coming from the satellite dish pointed at the sky. It started coming from the ground sensors I had placed in a perimeter around the dome. Something was out there, in the empty plains, and it was talking. I started hearing things at night, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the dome's metal exterior. I checked the outside cameras. Nothing but swaying grass. Then I heard a voice, carried on the wind. It was faint, distorted, and it was my own voice. It was a recording of me from earlier that day, reading a sensor log aloud into my recorder. Grid 4, 7.9. My own voice echoed back at me from the darkness. I was being studied, mimicked. I barricaded the door that night, my technical, scientific mind cast aside for pure animal fear. The next day, I found something by one of the ground sensors, a shape traced in the dirt. It was a perfect, complex geometric pattern, a fractal. It was a visual representation of the radio signal I'd been logging. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just talking, it was learning, and it was trying to show me it understood. The final night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in, a rare violent beast that turned the sky black. The power in the station flickered and died. The emergency generators kicked in, but my main communication and monitoring systems were fried. I was blind. And that's when the signals spiked, not on my dead equipment, but inside my mind. The pulsing pattern filled my mind, a silent, screaming language. A splitting headache brought me to my knees, and as lightning flashed, illuminating the plains outside, I saw it. Standing about 50 yards from the dome was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to be made of shivering, distorted air like heat haze. It had the vague shape of a person, but it was featureless, a shimmering silhouette of pure energy or static. It took a hesitant, jerky step towards the dome. It was drawn to the station, to the technology, to me. I knew with a certainty that transcended logic that I had to make it stop. I had to silence the conversation. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and did the only thing I could think of. I went to the central server rack, the heart of the station, and I destroyed it. I smashed the delicate machinery, the monitors, the transmitters, until the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the roar of the storm. As the last server screen went dark, the headache in my mind vanished. I looked outside. The shimmering figure was gone. They rescued me 2 days later. I was fired, of course, accused of vandalism and a complete mental breakdown. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I? I had no proof. I had destroyed it. I live in the city now. I can't stand the quiet. But sometimes, when I'm near a lot of electronics, a crowded subway car with everyone on their phones, a busy office, I get that same splitting headache, and I feel a faint familiar pulse in the back of my mind, a question asked in a language I can't understand. I silenced its radio tower, but I think it's still out there, looking for a new one. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at the comments section, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.